Campus beat, and of course we mean that literally these days on college campuses. Amy, an excellent piece from Tiana Lowe in National Review, nationalreview.com, arguing as one Washington state legislator has already proposed to defund Evergreen State University.
Oh, yeah.
In 1999, the Evergreen State College of Washington featured convicted cop killer and Black Panther Mumia Abu-Jamal as its commencement speaker via a recording. Abdul-Jamal was on death row and could not attend, yet the college eagerly gave him a platform to speak. This is not a joke. 18 years later, Evergreen State refuses to protect the physical safety and free speech rights of its own professors, like Brett Weinstein, we discussed, from the threats and aggression of student protesters with a sadly familiar illiberal bent. The student demands, by the way. You know the student demands.
You saw that? Are they still occupying the library there?
Don't know
they
their
haven't given up
status.
the fight.
Their demands, under threat of violence, we demand for the coordinator of the Trans and Queer Center to be permanently hired full-time. Currently, they're temporarily hired. We demand the creation of a permanent position that will support undocumented students. This position will have a budget that will create scholarships, housing, and protections. We demand that a video created for Day of Abstinence and Day of Presence, Day of Absence, of course, absence of white people, that was stolen by white supremacists and edited to expose and ridicule the students and staff be taken down by the administration this Friday. We demand Brett Weinstein, the professor I mentioned, who's a liberal, by the way, self-identified progressive, not progressive enough. We demand Brett Weinstein be suspended immediately without pay, but all students receive full credit.
Oh, okay. They don't go to class, but they receive full credit. Okay. Oh, did they also demand that their college education be paid for as well?
We demand the immediate firing of this person and that person, we demand the immediate disarming of police services and no expansion of police facilities or services at any point in the future. We demand mandatory sensitivity and cultural competency training for faculty, staff, administrators, and student employees. We demand the creation of an equity center.
An equity center. Oh, please.
And to that, the faculty have responded.
Oh, good.
As Evergreen faculty members, these are the undersigned, 75, 80 professors. We acknowledge that all of us who have the power within the institution share responsibility for the racist actions of others. Furthermore, those who are white bear a particularly large share of that responsibility. We acknowledge that we have a great deal of work to do in order to honor and live up to the demands made by student leaders during last week's protests. We acknowledge that students of color and others who are underrepresented and underserved have been voicing their demands to us for some time, and we have not truly listened and acted. So blah, blah, blah. In solidarity with students, we commit ourselves to participating actively and self-critically in the annual mandatory training specified in the MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, that's signed by UFE and management bargaining teams, holding each other accountable when we act in racist ways against our colleagues or our students, holding President Bridges accountable for the arguments, for the promises that he made at the all-campus forum, supporting the strategic plan put forward by Equity and Inclusion Council, blah, 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 reading like passages from a George Orwell novel, The Professors. After the keys were turned over to the kids, the professors didn't back their colleague, Brett Weinstein, who voiced opposition to the Day of Absence, forcing white people from campus. They rolled over him and rolled in with the students. Frankly, as did the president of the university.
They gave in to the student terrorists. That's what they did because they want to keep their jobs. That's why they did it.
Also because they see in those student agitators who they were when they were college students. And now they're the professorate and the administration. And this is why, I think, in part, you have the culture on campuses that you have. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Alfred Thomas, who is an English professor at the University of Illinois, Chicago, right here. Professor Thomas, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Oh, good morning. Thank you for having me.
You recently wrote a letter that referenced Paul Griffiths, who is a Duke University divinity professor who's also under siege for not going along with mandatory sensitivity training and the like that these Evergreen State professors are excited to comply with. Give us your take on what's happening at Evergreen State, what's happening with your friend Paul Griffiths, what's happening on college campuses.
Well, I think the problem with those particular schools, and I want to emphasize I don't think it's universally the case in every single university, the problem with those kinds of schools is that they tend to live in a kind of bubble. You know, they're either geographically or remote from the rest of the country. My own experience at UIC is a very fortunate one because, it's an urban campus, as I'm sure you know. The students are very much similar to my background, which is first-generation college, working class. They're very down to earth. So what I'm lucky enough to have at UIC is a combination of diversity and harmony. They actually can go together. I think the problem a lot of the time on some of these other campuses where they are sort of very rarefied and living in a kind of hothouse atmosphere is that they become detached from common sense. And I think I take a lot of your points and also Henry's points. I mean, clearly they've lost their sense of reason. In the case of Duke, for example, all that the colleague was doing, he used to be at UIC and now he's at Duke, all he was doing was expressing a different opinion. Now, he may have expressed it in a rather vitriolic way, but that's his right to express it. He wasn't aggressing anyone. He wasn't harassing anyone. He then found himself subject to a suit from a professor, by the way, the professor who had originally recommended this non-mandatory diversity training. She filed a suit against him for harassment. Well, if you read his original email, there's no way that you can construe his email as harassment, strongly worded maybe, but not harassment. And then the dean of the college accused him of sexism and racism. If you actually read again what he wrote, it is neither racist nor is it sexist. So again, what's disturbing in these instances is that the word racist is used as a kind of elastic term to encompass and damn anyone who doesn't agree with you. And that's, I think, where the Orwellian factor comes in. You referenced 1984, where language has become so diluted and evacuated of meaning that it can actually take on its opposite meaning. And in these extreme cases, I would suggest that diversity comes to mean uniformity, the Orwellian opposite of what it's supposed to be, because it's a kind of code to say to people, if you don't agree with us on this issue, then you are persona non grata. You're not a real person.
Well, hypothetically speaking, what if students at UIC wanted to have a day of abstinence, a day without white students or white professors? How would you handle that?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, I would probably have a similar issue as the professor at Evergreen State did, which is that, it's okay to have, a day of some kind of reflection on race in America, but don't make it a coercive exercise. And I think, again, his point was, and I think it's fair enough, that the exercise as it was introduced, which was to ask the white people to leave the campus, that is coercive. And it's kind of ironic given the fact that we should all be striving for desegregation, not more segregation. I think these kinds of arguments often end up collapsing and backwards on themselves. So, yeah, I would take a principled stand over something like that. But my experience is I've never come across that kind of thing at UIC. And so that's why I want to emphasize to you and to your listeners that I think these things are a problem and we have to be very attentive to them and react accordingly. But I don't think it's universally the case across the whole of the United States. I think there are campuses where there is more harmony as well as genuine diversity. So, as I say, my experience with UIC has been a universally positive one for the last 15 years that I've been there. Before that, I was at Harvard, which was obviously a very different kind of experience. I didn't particularly have bad experiences there. Certainly with the students, I think oftentimes in these cases, there is a sort of unholy alliance of radical student elements and the central administration, where the central administration actually kind of almost it goes along with these kinds of irrational demands. And I think that's very serious too. I think that people in the administration and faculty have to basically say to the students, look, guys, we have something here in the United States called First Amendment, and it's a precious thing that we've cultivated for 200 years since the Enlightenment, and you can't just run roughshod over that. So to that extent, I think we have to be patient and explain to the students, what the precious factor of our Constitution is. And to that extent, I tend to apportion more blame to faculty and central administration who go along with these kinds of things, because I think there is a problem of appeasement there. You cannot give in to this kind of thing. If it's bullying, we should never give in to bullying.
Well, and not to mention, in terms of assigning blame, these students that come to you from grade schools and high schools where
Mm.
apparently they were not instructed on the importance of the First Amendment or what a college is like, what it's supposed to be like, a free marketplace of ideas and intellectual
That's
pursuits
right.
and all of those things.
Yeah.
And we're talking about the high achievers, generally speaking, in high school, the 1/3 of high school students that are actually going on to post-secondary education, tomorrow's leaders, ostensibly. And that paints a fairly dismal picture of the future if so many of these students and so many of these campuses are tomorrow's leaders.
Well, I take that point. That's a very good one. But as I say, I think the good news is that not every single campus is like that.
Right.
My experience with USC students has been terrific. I love my students. They're very, very down to earth. They're real. They have jobs on the side. And they live in the real world. And so when we have a debate about whatever, I actually taught a course on utopian fiction, including 1984 and Brave New World. They're completely on board with these texts. I mean, they're not decrying them as fascists. They're saying, "Oh, wow, that's so relevant to today, isn't it?" And of course, they're right. So, I'm a little bit more optimistic than you are. Having said that, I do understand your concern, and I think when these things arise, and there is a pattern, we should address them.
What was?
I think it's ironic that-
Sure, go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's ironic that very often I think these kids who are behaving in this way are actually products of themselves of privilege. So they're kind of undermining their own premise because they see themselves as subversive and anti-establishment. But they're actually, insofar as they're behaving rather like spoiled consumers, I pay his salary, therefore he must go. That's the sort of the quintessence of capitalism, is it not?
Mm.
So I think they kind of undermine themselves when they behave like that.
Yeah.
They're not acting in a progressive capacity. They're not being revolutionary as they clearly like to see themselves. They're kind of being counter-revolutionary, actually.
Yeah, they're dilettantes. Absolutely. That's a good point. And I wanted to get I understand you were a student in Czechoslovakia in the 70s and 80s.
Mm.
And that would have been still with the existence of the Soviet Union. And so I wonder what your experience was like as a student there and if you draw any parallels.
Well, I think that's one reason why I'm very sensitive to these issues when they crop up, because it reminds me of not so much my own personal experience, because I wasn't Czech, I'm a British person, I'm sure you can tell that from my accent. I happened to study Slavic languages, Eastern European languages, in the communist era, so I spent a lot of time both as an undergrad and as a graduate student in Prague, and what I witnessed there was a society in which, free speech was banned. The works of Franz Kafka were banned from the bookstores. I remember that distinctly, And so it's not that I was personally oppressed because I was a sort of guest student, but I saw how people were oppressed. And I had friends, I was sort of hanging out a lot of the time with dissidents, and I saw how they were treated. They were often put in jail for their opinion, or they lost their jobs. The most famous of them, Václav Havel, who subsequently became president after the fall of communism. I met him subsequently in the United States when he was president, but I never met him during that period because he was in prison the whole time, and we're talking about, a couple of years. So it's a kind of empathy factor for me when I see this kind of behavior and people being got at, like Paul Griffiths, like Professor Weinstein. I think there's another case at Northwestern, a cause célèbre of a woman called Laura Kipnis. You may have heard about that.
Mm-hmm.
She was also attacked for expressing her own opinion. It does remind me of the Soviet experience. It makes me think that that free speech comes at a cost, and that we have to be perpetually vigilant if we are to preserve our democracy.
Well, perhaps we need a little bit of a velvet revolution on certain campuses. Here he is, Alfred Thomas, UIC English professor. Professor Thomas, thanks so much for joining us and sharing your perspectives. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you very much.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Before you see it on TV, share it on Facebook.